Hey guys, welcome back. So right now we want to start discussing our JSON web tokens, but before we go ahead and implement them and write mountains of beautiful code to do that, I want us to have a full understanding of the purpose that they serve in the whole workflow, the API security, and everything. So there is a leading authority, at least in my book, they're a leading authority in the form of Auth0. If I'm not mistaken, they're probably pioneers for this kind of protocol. But you can go to JWT.io and you will land on the same page that I have here, where they display to you a sample token and kind of show you the breakdown. So we're going to discuss exactly why tokens are necessary and what exactly they tell basically when they're being decoded. So let us say once again the person attempts to log in to our API, or they attempt to access a resource from our API. We have restricted access. So we are telling them that we need to know who you are and what you are able to do. But then I need to make sure that you are somebody who should be able to access my system to begin with, right? So our token here pretty much would be issued to them after a successful login attempt. So they would pass over their username and password that we already have stored in our system because they're registered. Once we verify that they are who they say they are, we're going to give them a token with information that we have on them, so that when they are making subsequent requests, they can use this token instead of trying to log in every single time. So this token would represent a hash, or some encoded representation of all the information that we have for them that could include their username, their password, not their password, apologies, let me backtrack. Their username, their email address if they're different, how long we're allowing them to use this token to access the system, what role they have, and this other one called claims, which means that you are able to do this but not that sort of vibe, right? So those are the things that we encode in this huge string and send back to them after they have successfully logged in. Now, the benefit of this is that on their side, they don't have to keep on calling the login, because remember that we're not keeping the session to know if they were logged in previously or not. So instead of them having to try and log in every single time they're going to make an API call, they log in once, get this token, and then make every other call with this token attached to the request. On our side, when we get the request and we see that there's a token, we decode it, validate that it came from us, and then redirect them accordingly, or provide that response accordingly. So that is what JWT security is all about. Now you'll see that this string is actually color coded red. I think that's, I'm going to say lavender, and blue. Right? And pretty much each section is explained over here. So this is the header section, which contains what hashing algorithm was used, as well as the type of token, which in this case is JWT. The middle section has the payload, or the data. So the payload is really to say all of this information is what I know about this user. So the more information we pack into it, is the bigger this section will get. All right. And over to the right, you see here, they're showing you what exactly is included in this payload. So the payload can have like the expiration date of the token, or date and time, because usually you would issue a token for a finite period of time. So as long as this token is valid, then they don't have to log in again. Right? As soon as it's invalid, then they may want to log in, get a fresh token, and then continue. So that's the purpose that one serves. And then the parts now with the signature, usually the server uses the signature part to verify whether the token contains the valid information or not. So if we issue the token, then we would want to verify that it came from us, because anybody can really encode this kind of data, but they want to make sure that they have down here encoded relative to our issuing key to make sure that it really came from us and it is valid in our system. So I hope that cleared up some of the let's say the gray areas around what JWT is and why we're using it. When we come back, we will start changing up our configurations in our API to facilitate its use. All right, guys, welcome back. So we're going to jump right into setting up our configurations for our JWT. So I'm going to create a new section in our app settings file. I'm going to call it JWT. And basically, we're just going to hard code some values that we know we'll need along the way when issuing and validating. All right, so I'm going to say issuer, and this means that I am the issuing authority. So you can put your application name or your domain name, whatever it is. I'm just going to say the application name here, hotel listing API. So that means only when a JWT or a token comes in with this issuer will I pay attention. But you'll see more to that later on. And there are other things you can put in here. You can put in like the preset expiration time. Actually, you can put a key here because there is a key value that is going to be used to set up the token. However, generally speaking, you don't want to put that key in the app settings file because of security reasons, right? So if you put it there, then somebody can see the app settings file and then figure out the key that's being used. I'm putting in a GUID value here, but this could easily just be your name or whatever, something unique that you want to use to verify or generate the key, right? So alternatively, instead of putting something that's sensitive inside of the app settings file, because you don't want too much sensitive information in this file, what you could do is create an environment variable. Now, of course, if you create it on the development machine, then you have to make sure you create it also on the server when it is deployed. So a quick way to bring up the environment or set up, the environment variable is to bring up command prompt. Make sure you're in administrator mode. So if it is that this has to happen on a machine at work where you don't have administrator privileges, then you have to make sure that you include this in your release notes so that the system administrator or DevOps engineer, or whoever is doing the deployment, knows what to do. So I'm going to say set X, and once again, this is an environment variable, so this goes down to the Windows level. So unless a hacker or somebody malicious was able to access the actual OS and log into the machine, they probably will never see this value or this key. All right. So I'm going to call this key, give it the value. So once again, this is just a GUID that I generated. It's complicated enough. It doesn't necessarily have to be this complicated. But once again, it's context is everything, right? So whatever value you put there, you just make sure you wrap it in quotation marks. Let me do that. So key, open quotes, the value, close quotation, /m. And the /m basically is saying that it must be a system variable and not a local variable. So that's why you need to make sure that you're admin. So you see, it was saved. All right. So now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and create our service extension because we need to extend our startup. So once again, instead of doing it here, we'll just go over to service extensions and create a new method. This one we're going to, and it has to be public static void. So I'll just copy this up until this part and say configure JWT. And then we're taking the same parameters of the services, but then we're also taking iConfiguration, right? So iConfiguration, which gives us access to the app settings configuration stuff, right? For a little context stuff that when we, let me see. All right. So you see here, we said configuration, get connection string, iConfiguration, right? So that's what we're referencing over here, iConfiguration. So go ahead and include anything that's missing. And then inside this file is where a bit of magic is going to happen. So we're going to say var JWT settings is equal to, And then I'm going to call on the configuration dot get section. And the section that we're going to be getting is JWT settings. All right, so that's what, let me just verify that I spelled it. Oh, it's JWT. Apologies, I call it JWT. All right, this is giving an error, and I think it's because I included the wrong library. So let me try that again. IConfiguration, and I want extensions.configuration, not automappers. Let me try that again. And there we go, no errors. All right, so the secret key now, let's just say var key is equal to, and then I can call on environment dot get environment variable. And remember that we set the name of this environment variable just now. I'm going to bring back up my command prompt. I set it to key. So whatever you use there, that is the name of your environment variable. So key. Next, we want to say services.add authentication. So I'm going to add an authentication option with options. Sorry, let me just get this. So whether you say OPT or you just say O, but lambda. And then I'm just going to open and close brace because we have quite a few configurations that will be going in here. So anytime you have multiple lines, you can just open the curly brace and then each line ends with a semicolon. So I'm going to say O.default authentication scheme is equal to, and then they have JWT bearer defaults. So what's not here, and I think I need a few libraries or so on from NuGet. So let me just check JBearer. So there it is. I need to include the Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication JWT bearer. So let me go ahead and get that. Now it's included. JWT bearer defaults dot authentication scheme. So this is basically saying that I'm adding authentication to the application, and the default scheme that I want is the JWT. All right. So off the bat, once somebody tries to authenticate, check for a bearer token. That's basically what that is saying. And then default challenge scheme is the same thing. All right. So check for that for authentication and challenge whatever information comes across, challenge it based on the JWT standard, right? And then we're extending this. So I'm just going to remove the semicolon for a bit. So I'm going to say in the next line dot add JWT bearer. And then this once again is going to have options. So I'm going to do my token, lambda, and then open and close curly brace. And let me just fix the indentation, right? So then we say O dot token validation parameters. So there are quite a few parameters that you can set up along the way. Each person might be different. Once again, the situation might be different. So what I'm doing is just educational, but in your enterprise setting, you may have other needs than what I am going to portray here. So if that turns out to be your situation, then you just act accordingly, right? So new token validation parameters, and then we're going to now outline some of the parameters that we want to use to validate that this token, should grant somebody access. So then here we can say, do we want to validate who issued the token? That's generally a good idea, considering that we went through all the trouble of saying, here is the issuer. So that means if somebody puts some other value there, then we're saying, well, if another value is there, then it should be invalid. Do we want to validate the lifetime, right? So this way we'll reject the token if it is expired, we'll automatically reject it. So do you want to do that? Yes. And then another one that we probably want to do is validate the issuer signing key. And we already established that this was the key value up top here, right? So we want to make sure that it was the correct signing key. And then we continue. And then I'm going to say that a valid issuer, or the valid issuer for any given token, would be JWT settings, which is the config section, .get section out of that, and then it would be issuer, right? So whatever value is set for the issuer, I want that dot value. There we go. And then let's say the issuer signing key is equal to a new symmetric. So now we're going to be hashing it. So that's why I said it can be a complicated value. It doesn't necessarily have to be, because when it's going to set it up, we're going to be hashing it anyway. So we say new symmetric security key, and then we encode. So you see, even with my very, very complicated one that was based on a GUID, we're encoding this and then we're going to hash it again afterwards, right? So that's why I said that it doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated, but encoding.utf get bytes, so we're breaking it down to bytes, and then we pass in the key value that we got from the environment. So the most important part about the key is don't put it in the app settings, right? It's frowned upon. It could have gone there, but to be out of abundance of caution, you put it in the environment variables. I have put it in the app settings before, but then that was for a very internal application, not necessarily public facing, right? So we just go ahead and include any missing references there. And then I think that's just about it for validation parameters. But once again, based on your situation, you may need more validations than I am putting here, right? So this is all I'm going to use, semicolon, semicolon, and then that's it for our extensions. So now we can go over to startup, and we can call on our configure JWT. So services.configure JWT, and we have that configuration object being passed down the line, right? And then we can just do a build just to make sure everything is okay. So after a successful build, we can continue with our task. So the next thing that I want to do is create some functionality for the validation and the issuing of the token, right? So I'm going to go up. Let me just collapse everything in the project, all right? And then in our, well, I have iRepository and repository. So what I'm going to do is create another folder called services. I just want to make sure everything is well segregated so I know where what is. So services would be for our extensions, right? I'm going to add a new class. I'm sorry. I should have named this IAuth Manager. So add a new class, call it IAuth Manager. If you end up doing exactly what I did, you just rename the file and it will automatically rename that. But then, sorry, it's not a class, it's an interface. There we go. So in this interface, I want to have a task that's going to return Boolean, and I want to call it validate user. And then this is going to take the login user DTO, and I'll just call it user DTO for uniformity purposes. There we go. Go ahead and include any missing references as usual. And then I'm going to have something else that will create and return the token. So I'm going to call it create token. All right. So I need a class to consume them, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and add, and I'm going to call this one auth manager. This one is actually a class which is going to inherit from its interface namesake, which is then going to say, please implement the methods that you told me I should have. Before we move on, we have to make sure that we register our service in our bootstrapper here in the startup.cs file. So we're just going to say services.add_scoped and have IAuth manager mapped to auth manager, and we're once again adding it as scoped. So that's very important. So where were we? We're going to create this token. So inside of auth manager, I am going to be putting down I'm going to be injecting two things. So I need firstly, I need the user manager, which I can easily get from account manager. So I need that exact instance of user manager, right? And I'll just go ahead and include the missing reference. And I'll also need to inject an instance of the configuration manager. So I'll just go ahead and make representations for those and then finish the injection. And once that's done, we can continue. So let's start off with validating the user. I think that's a lower hanging fruit. So let's just deal with that one first, right? So when we want to validate the user, we basically say, we want to say, does this user exist in the system and is the password correct, right? So I can say var user is equal to await user manager dot find by name async. And then remember that for this find by name basically means find by the username. There it is. It's asking for the username, and we're using the email address as the username. So we're only asking for email address in the DTO, but system-wise, we're storing that as a username also, right? So I can just go ahead and do that. And this is saying, oh, so await, that means I need my async, right? So anytime you know you write a perfect await statement and you're still getting the red line, just double check if you have the async. It tends to slip, but with practice, it becomes permanent. So then after we check if we have found this user. So this is going to return the user's object and store it here. Then I'm going to say, and I'm just going to, instead of writing an if statement, I'm just going to write out like a ternary operator to say user not equal to null. And so just double check. Well, this is not a ternary statement. This is just a logic statement. So return if the user is not equal to null and user manager dot check password async. I will say user dot password. Sorry, not user DTO, because we don't know the password hash. So user DTO dot password. So this is automatically going to see if this password is valid for the user that is being checked. So if we return somebody with that username and the password is valid, well, this is going to return true or false based on the outcome of all of that. And what we are missing here is, oh, we need the user object. So I need user, comma, user DTO.password. There we go. So it's going to check the password, see if it's valid. And this already would have something if that username existed. And then we know it's a valid user attempt. Now let us flesh out what happens in the create token operation. So here we want to create an object for signing credentials. And I'm going to want to get what we call claims. And I think I need to include a reference. All right, so for the create token portion now, we want to do a few things. We want to create some signing credentials, we want to get claims, and then we want to add them to the token option. So I'm just going to write them line by line. Get the signing credentials, get claims, and then create token options. All right, we have to create these methods, so don't worry about the red lines right now. But then at the end of the operation, I'm going to say return new JWT security and more than likely this needs something. So JWT security token handler, let's check. So we have to include this identity model tokens.jwt, this, and that's a method, or that's a class, dot write token, which is also a method, but it takes the token options. So whatever we get back here is based on what we get back here and based on what we get back there. All right, so let's start off with this one. So I'm just going to hover over it and generate the method for it, and it can be private. We don't need it to have any public operation. So we're getting the signing credentials. So the first thing I need to do is get the key. All right, and we're going to do a similar operation to what we did in the service extensions to get the key. So I just went over and copied and pasted those two lines. The key is gotten from the environment variable, and then we encode it to get that secret. And then the next thing that we're going to do is just return new signing credentials, and that's going to have the secret. So secret here would be the encoded version, right? Secret, comma, and then we let it know that the security algorithm used for this was the HM SHA-256. All right, there we go. So that's taking care of the signing credentials, right? Now let's do the get claims. So I'm just going to hover over that one, do the same generate method stub for it. All right, and then and I just noticed that this is of type object, so I'm going to make it very explicit that it is signing credentials. That's the return type of this, right? I'm sure object would have worked, but I just like to make sure everything is strongly typed. All right, so this one, let me just go ahead and make it async, and it needs to be a task that is going to return a list of claims. All right, so the reason we have to go through all of this is, or claim rather, not claims. The reason we have to go through all of this to define the types is that we said var. If we were explicit up top here, then it would have inferred what return types to put. But because we said var, it doesn't know, so it's just being very vague. All right, so let us go ahead and get the claims. So I'm going to declare a new list. Var claims is equal to a new list of type claim, and we're going to add a new claim. And then the thing with claims is that these are the bits and pieces of information that really tell who or what you can do, right? So I claim to be this, or I claim to be able to do that. So those are the things that we want to make sure are included in our application, or in our token rather. So the first claim that I want to add is the claim types dot. And when you look, there are a bunch of enums. So these are all claim types that are there. See, role is there. You can add multiple roles, email, all of those wonderful things, right? So I'm going to say name. Name generally means username, email, self-explanatory, etc. So if I said I wanted to add a claim type name, the name of the user who was just validated, which, all right, I'm going to have to change something here. So I am keeping the user local to validate user, which means then I would have to try and pass that along. So what I'll do here is create another variable here of type API user, and I'm going to call it user. And then instead of localizing user in validate, I'm just going to do that. So once we're in the context of this class, we will have access to the user data that is added, right? So let's continue. So name is going to come from user dot, and we'll just use, well, we can use username, right? Like for like. So in a situation where you wouldn't be using the email as a username, then you have the username to use as the name claim, and at minimum you would want to have that, right? Then we can say var roles, and then we can await and use user manager to get the roles for the user. So there's get roles async. There we go. And we're just passing the user. So it's automatically going to go fetch all the roles for this user and return them in the form of a list. There we go, a list. And then for each of those, we want to add them. So for each role in roles, we want to add that claim. So I can say claims dot add, and then I will just say new claim the same way we did it here. We'll just say claims dot add new claim, but then claim type would be role, and then the role coming back, or the role to be added, would be role from our loop. All right, and then after all of that, and we built it up, and once again, based on the claims that you wish to put in, you can see all of the potential claims here. You can put in as many as you want, right? Once you're done that, you can just return claims. So that's 2 down and 1 more to go, right? So I'm just going to generate this method stub now, which is going to combine the signing credentials and the claims and create the actual token to be issued to the user, right? So here, the return type would be of type JWT security token, right? So JWT security token, just so that we're very explicit as to what it should be. Now inside of this method, we're going to be saying that var, so we have to get the settings, var JWT settings is equal to, and I really don't want to retype this. Let me see if I can just get it quickly here. Arguably, I could have retyped it, but that's fine. Var settings is that. Then we say var options, or token options, is equal to new JWT security token. And then we have to use this constructor. So we don't want an empty one, of course. So we're going to fill in certain parameters. So I'm going to specify that the issuer that I want is coming from the JWT settings section for the valid issuer, just like what we had here. That is the issuer that we want. So we put that as the issuer there. The next one would be the claims. And then the claims would come from our list claims, which was passed down in the parameters here, right? And then we want to set expiration. So expiration is always good to set. So it actually asks you for an expires value. Now you could set 15, you could set 10. I mean, you could do that. Or you could just modify the settings file and set the value there, right? So since that's where all of my hard-coded values are going, I'm just going to keep it uniform. And so I'm going to just say get that value from the settings file. It's in the section called lifetime. So that means this value, this token, once created, will only be valid for 15 minutes. Let me just correct that, all right? And then the signing credentials, which we set already or actually passed down, would be here. Now, once all of that is done, we go ahead and we return our options. Or let me name this more appropriately. This is the token, because this is the creation of the token. So we're returning the token, and then that is token, right? Then we serialize it into a string and return that string. Now we've done quite a bit of work here, and the one thing that we probably need to do afterwards is to make sure that and I'm sorry, I'm just seeing an error here with the configuration. It was the wrong one. Let me just make sure I have the right one. do a build. So I was saying that we've done quite a bit here to get our token things up and running. So what we want to do is, all right, I'm sorry. So this is good. So because I had the wrong configuration, I wasn't seeing this error. Expire should be a date time, and I only put 15 minutes. So let me redo that. So I'm going to say var expiration is equal to, and what should really happen is we say date time dot now. When was the token asked for? Let's add a, a few minutes. So whatever it is, whatever threshold you want. So if it is add a day, add minutes, add hours, you just say add that appropriate one. So it's add minutes, and then we would put in the value. And value here is string, so that means I need to do something like a convert dot to, and I'll just say to int 32. Or does this require double? I think that requires double, so let me do a convert to double instead. Break line and close that. So add minutes convert to double. There we go. I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. So we do that convert to double, and then expires is getting the value from the expiration, right? So at that point, we know when the token would no longer be valid, and I'm missing a semicolon here. Let me do a build, and we have no errors. So I was saying, when we come back, we will explore how authentication actually, or authorization actually, one, prevents access to our resources, and then two, how we actually set up the endpoint to authenticate the user and issue the token accordingly. Hey guys, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at the configurations needed to get our Swagger documentation to highlight what is needed authentication-wise. So we just set up JWT authentication, and we want our Swagger doc to reflect that. So we'll start off the configuration with our startups.cs file. And never mind the code that you might see appearing that you don't necessarily have. We'll get to it eventually, but right now we're just focusing on refactoring for our Swagger documentation. So I'm going to add a new method, and I'm just going to call it add Swagger doc, and I'm passing in the object of the services, right? So I can just control dot and generate a method stub for add Swagger doc, and then I can remove this line of code, or these lines of code. So all of this is happening in the configure services method in our startup file. So when I go down to add Swagger doc, let us modify, take out the throw new exception, and we will put back the services.add Swagger gen with the configuration. Now for this section, we're going to have a few more lines of configuration, right? So above the Swagger doc section, I'm going to put c dot add security definition. There we go. And then the security definition needs a name. So I'm going to say bearer, or you can say bearer token, right? Just something so that the user can see, okay, this is the security definition. And then I'm going to say new open API security scheme. And that's an object, so we can initialize it, or we can declare it with our curly braces rather. And in there, I'm going to have to put in some, let's say, metadata. So what is the description that I want here? So for that value, I put in @ JWT authorization. So that sign just makes it a literal string, right? So JWT authorization scheme, enter bearer space, then add your token in the text. So this is just instructions to the user, right? And then other fields that we're going to add include a name. So I'm going to say name is equal to, that's on the description, which is comma separated. There we go. Name is equal to authorization, and then I'll say in, meaning where do we put the authorization? We know we put it in the header. What is the type? It's an API key, so I have type is equal to security scheme type dot API key, and then I have scheme as bearer. So once again, this is more like a definition to be added to our Open API document. After that, I'm going to add in actual security requirements, because remember that we can still go in and test it freely, but then because we're using the JWT now, we have to be using Postman for the testing, which is not the worst thing, but it would be so convenient if we could just test it using Swagger, right? So I'm going to say c.add security requirement, and we're letting Swagger know that there is an Open API security requirement. And once again, we're initializing this object. And inside of that requirement, I have another object body in which I am going to put. So here, what it requires is a list, or it's really a list of Open API key, Open API security scheme called a key, and the list of values, right? So it's really just one big collection that we're adding together. That's why we have the open and close curly braces. So in there, I'm going to add a new Open API security scheme object. And in that, we have the reference, which is a new Open API reference. There we go. And just follow along, because I know that it can look like a lot of code and the red lines will soon disappear. So don't worry about them too much. So I have a new Open API. Sorry, let me take those off. In the reference, we have the type is equal to a reference type dot. So that's an enum, and we say reference type dot security scheme. And then our ID, which is a string value, is bearer. After that, that's the reference. Then we have to define the scheme. Scheme is, and we know that when it's bearer tokens, it's OAuth 2. The name of this is, once again, bearer. And then our in is the same as what we defined up here. So I'll just copy and paste. All right. So you see some of these things are repeating as we go along. And then after we have that defined, I'm just going to give the string list a value. So I'll just initialize a new list of type string just to appease the compiler. All right. Don't really have to pass anything in, at least not this time around. Include the missing reference and open and close. And that's really it for configuring the Swagger doc. So let's review this. Instead of doing this one line inside of the services file, we created a new method. So we know that we do that with our extension methods here. So you could easily have done that, right? You could have just created another extension or configuration that would say add Swagger doc and do all of that in there. So it's just another flavor, whichever one you prefer, no problem. So we have the method, and then we're fleshing out some of the rules around how this Swagger document should be defined. So we're defining a security definition. We have our security requirement, and then we have the actual Swagger documentation. And let's take it for a spin. So if I control F5, I'm going to test a login to get our token. So let me do that. And this is an administrative user, which means that this user should be able to create. So if I tested the get, which is not authorized, it still works. You'll also take note of the fact that you have little padlocks beside each endpoint, and at the top, you'll see authorize. So what's going to happen now? If I try to do a post, and let's say I'm just going to create a country, I shouldn't be able to just create a country because I would get the 401. So how do I test this in Swagger? Well, I can go to the authorize. I already have the token, and that is the set of instructions that we had typed in the configuration, right? Enter bearer, then a space, and then the token. So bearer, space, token, because that is actually how any client app would actually put in the bearer token to call the API. So this is just mimicking what any client app would do. So we do that, we click authorize, and then it has authorized this entire context or this entire page or testing session. So now it's going to use that token with every request that it sends. So when I try to create the country again, this time, okay, I'm getting a 400. So we know that 400 means that it tried and it failed, which means the authorization is actually working, right? So let us try Venezuela. Wow, what spelling? Venezuela. There we go. And the short name is Ven, for instance, Venezuela. And then I execute again, and I'm seeing that now the country name is too long, so I think it's what, 2 letters. Sorry about that. Execute. There we go. So now we have Venezuela in our database. So that is how you can configure Swagger so that you can actually test in Swagger using the JWT. However, it's up to you whether you want to use Swagger or you want to use Postman. Just use the right tools to get the right results. All right, guys, welcome back. So, coming off the heels of setting up our authentication manager to generate and issue the tokens, what we want to do is actually finish up our login endpoints to the tune where we actually validate the token and allow or deny access to anybody passing in this token, right? So the first thing that we want to do is inject our newly created auth manager service. So we know how to do the injection already. So you can just go ahead and hit pause and go ahead and complete this injection operation. So once you've added the new 3 lines, one for the private property, one into the constructor and the initialization, then we can go about creating our login endpoint. So you would have already commented out the login endpoint. You can uncomment it. And I already have the revised version of it on screen. So let's just go through it together. So what we want to do is log, we want to validate our requested or the data coming in, the DTO. Then I'm going to say if the auth manager validate user, if not, right? So you could easily write this as equals false in case you're new to C#. If not, you just put the exclamation sign. So this means if it is not a valid user, then return unauthorized, because, well, if you try to log in and you're not a valid user, then you're not authorized to go any further, right? Otherwise, we're going to return accepted or okay, whatever it is. I'm saying accepted, new, and a new object with an expression called token, and it will take the value of the token that is created. So we say await underscore auth manager dot create token. So remember that that's what we would have set up in our auth manager just now. Create token goes through, generates all of these bits and pieces of data, and then returns the token. So that's what that payload will have. So we want to go ahead and test that functionality. So let's revisit our login endpoint. I'm just going to use Swagger for this part of it. So I'll just try it out and put in a user that I know I created and is already registered. And then I'm going to click execute. Let's see what happens. All right, and we're getting a token response. So you see this big string. So token, that's by virtue of the expression we put in the custom object, and the value being passed is the token that is here. So if I take this token and go to our website to look at what's in tokens, paste it, then we'll see here that we have the algorithm, we have trevortoexample.com, that's the claim for the user, we have the role, all right, and we have the expiration time, and if you hover it will show you exactly the time from when it's issued and the issuer. All right, and then if we wanted to go as far as verifying the signature, we could do that, but we already have the mechanism to do that internally, so we don't need to do that here. So now what I want to do is experiment with actually preventing somebody access to our endpoint. So I'm going to use our hotel controller for that exercise. So let us say that the ability to get the list of hotels, everybody should be able to do that. We should be able to call it without authenticating, which is what we have been doing up until now. However, we want to add an authorize flag or annotation to the call to get one hotel's details. So we just put on authorize. And actually, you could extend the annotation here for the HTTP GET and add authorize right there. All right, so you could do it either way. So if you have this one, you don't need this one. Personally, I like to separate them. So I'll have the HTTP GET, authorize, and actually like to, or prefer to put it at the top. So as I see it, I know it's an authorized endpoint. All right. So what we want to do is test a call to this endpoint, unauthorized and authorized. So let's go. And for this activity, I'm going to use Postman. So I'm going to firstly test the one that we haven't authorized just to make sure that it still works. All right, there's a list of hotels. We have 3 hotels. Good. Now I'm going to test the one with the endpoint that requires an ID value, right? So when I click send, it's going to say 401 unauthorized. It's not saying 401 unauthorized because I didn't log in or whatever, because I mean, this is already authorized and we set up the default schema to say, I need to see a token in order to authorize or not. So all of that is happening automatically. If we have an old token in there, which I do, this is a token that was issued more than 15 minutes ago, then it will automatically also deny access. So when a token is issued and then it expires, it is the onus of the client calling application, to go and fetch a new token, meaning go through the login process again, get a new token, and then come back and try and access this endpoint. All right. So in Postman, what we want to do is go over to authorization and choose bearer token from this drop-down list. Then we provide the token that we have, which is the fresh token. And then when we do that, and I'm still getting a 401 unauthorized, so that means there's some configuration that is missing. Let me go, more than likely it's in the startup.cs, and I think I left off one of the middleware. So I need to add app.use authentication right here. All right. So make sure you have this use authentication, and order matters in this situation. So authentication, then authorization, and all of that before this, or app.mvc. The different .NET Core versions may have different middlewares being included. So as long as you get that general theme, you should be good. So let's try that same request again. And we're having much better success. All right, so we're getting a status 200 okay, and we're seeing the one hotel that we requested. So now you see that we just protected our endpoint, because if I remove this and say no auth and then try and send again, I get a 401 unauthorized. Once I include the bearer token, I get the status 200. If I modify this bearer token, then it's unauthorized because the token could not be validated against the information that was encoded and put in originally. So that is how you can go ahead and harden your API. And once again, this JWT method is very secure, because this payload, yes, it can be decoded, but it shouldn't contain any information that is too sensitive. Any information that it contains should be information that, if you see it, it's of no major consequence to the API and the underlying infrastructure. However, it is enough for me to verify who you are and that I am the one who gave you access to the system.